If your child's going through something and they need to confide in somebody and it's not you, then there are only two other options. They have no one to go to, in which case they're terribly alone, or they found somebody to go to and you don't get to pick who it is or what values that person has.
Welcome back to I Just Have to Say with Laura and Max. I have a very special guest here today on the podcast. Like many of you, I discovered Rabbi Shais Taub via Instagram, where he now boasts a following of over 250,000. And I love this because it's not something you see every day that a rabbi achieves social media fame. And I'm personally so glad that you have, because the messages that you share are so important. And that's why I'm so excited to have you on the podcast today. You talk a lot about the importance of family, about being a good parent. And you also talk about what breaks so many families apart and what broke my family apart when I was a child, and that's addiction. So we're going to talk about both of those things today. The first video that you shared that really grabbed my attention was a replay of none other than Ross Perot. I had to ask who he was because I didn't remember Ross Perot. And he was in a presidential debate talking about the importance of family. And you talk about this a lot. You talk specifically about the importance of a present father in the home. And I know that this has become a controversial thing to say. My father wasn't able to be present in my home when I was growing up because of addiction. And I was there. I can speak to this. And thank God I discovered a program of solution, which you discover in your book, God of Our Understanding. And by the time my father died about 1.5 years ago, I was able to have this really beautiful relationship with him, even though he died at 70 after relapsing. And while I'm so grateful for my journey, and I can talk about that all day, the pain that I felt as a child and the pain that children feel because of an absent father or a father who's emotionally unavailable is really impossible to describe. So I'm really glad that you talk about this, that you bring so much attention to it and talk about it so courageously. Why do you believe it's so important to have a present father and to be a present father?
Wow. Okay. So first of all, before I try to answer the question, it's amazing how much overlap there is in the content that I'm putting out and the things that you are interested in, I guess, based on your own life experience. And I don't know if this is interesting to anyone else but me, but it is interesting to me because I put out stuff that I find interesting, not things that I think will be popular, just things that I find interesting. And that it's kind of wild for me when I meet real human beings who are like, yeah, well, that's also interesting to me. Those are my experiences. So it's very fun, and it's also very gratifying to meet you and to hear the intersection between what your experiences have been and my experiences and the content that I'm putting out. So first of all, I want to get that out of the way and say, it's very cool for me to be having this.
It's amazing. That's how I feel reading your book. I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe he's saying these things that I've felt my whole life. So the feeling is very mutual.
Okay, excellent. So we're both enjoying this, meeting each other in real life. Okay. So you asked about the importance of a father. I just want to clarify, I don't mean to imply. You have to be so careful with everything on social media because people watch little clips, little sound bites, and they take them in these absolutist forms of like all or nothing propositions. I don't mean to imply that mothers are not also important.
They're very important.
Also important.
Yes, very important. Also, you have a lot of mothers who are raising their children on their own against their will. The father is just not there. So I think saying what you're saying and saying a present father is important, you've got a single mother like, hey, well, what do I do about that?
What do I do about that? Right. When it's not even her choice. Yeah. And of course, there's so many different scenarios. There are statistically, there are more single mothers raising their children than single fathers, although there are plenty of single fathers who are raising children without the help of a mother. And sometimes the reason the other parent is not in the picture is because that parent is not forthcoming and being an active parent. Sometimes it's because the co-parent is excluding them. And there are so many different scenarios. But the bottom line is like this. Let me keep it hopefully as simple as possible in a way that everybody can agree with. Your relationship with your parents. Right now, I'll just say parents as a general catch-all term for mother and father. Not only is it the first relationship in your life, and therefore becomes the prototype for all the other relationships you're going to have in your life, But it really sets the tone for your entire premise about what kind of world it is that you live in. And when that relationship is lacking stability, then you go on to experience reality in a destabilized fashion and have to spend, usually for most people, an entire lifetime, or at least well into adulthood, overcoming the effects of that lack of stability. So I think we could all agree that the more secure the relationship is with one's parents, the better the person is going to do in relationships and in setting goals and in being emotionally regulated. And as a rabbi, I'll add another thing that people overlook. When you talk about faith, people don't realize when they can't trust their parents, this undermines their entire ability to have a relationship with a power greater than themselves. And I've known great minds of theology, clergy who could teach and explain all of the great wisdom from all the holy books and couldn't have a personal relationship with God because that part of their brain had been broken because of the instability they experienced in their relationships with their parents.
You write about this.
Is that a big enough reason to say that it's incredibly important?
It's absolutely a big enough reason. And you write about that in your book, God of Our Understanding. And in 12-Step Recovery, the first 3 steps talk about coming to believe in a God of our understanding. And you talk about that being about one's relationship with God. And I'm so glad you brought up how difficult it can be to have any type of relationship with God or to have faith in God when those initial relationships are ruptured or non-existent because the trust is broken. And when I was 20 years old, I was born in, I'm a Jewish woman, and I was very interested in my faith my whole life. I used to have my parents drop me off at Shabbat services by myself. My father was raised in an Orthodox home, and my mom was a Jew from Texas. And neither one of them was particularly observant anymore. My father was raised as a very observant Jew, but he had gotten very distant from it by the time he had me. I was so into my religion. I loved being Jewish. My parents would drop me off at Shabbat services on Saturday and then come pick me up. By the time I was 20, I felt betrayed. I felt like, how could you do this to me, God? Why is this happening to me? I was in so much pain. And the way that pain manifested for me was these sort of repetitive toxic relationships, which I'll talk about. But it wasn't until I found a program that very few people know about. It's called Al-Anon. It's a program for friends and family members of alcoholics, which, you work the same 12 steps as the alcoholic. And I came to believe in a God that cared about me. This God that I've referenced in a previous episode as having a picture of me on his refrigerator.
Oh,
and it was
that's so paternal, or maybe even maternal.
That's
like a loving, proud parent keeps their kids' artwork, or you said a picture, not a picture you drew, a picture of you.
A picture of me. Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
And just loved
exactly.
me and cared about me. Yes, I needed to feel cared. I still think about that. I think about the way that I love my children, that I love them so unconditionally and so fiercely. That's how God cares about me. And it's only when I believe that I could actually have faith in God.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So from there, I meet my husband when I'm 24 years old, and he's Jewish, and he has, tons of Jewish family.
You had already found the program when you met your husband?
I'd found the program, and I'd been in it for 4 years. And I would tell my husband, I met him at a party, and I knew he was Jewish, and I knew very quickly, Rabbi, that he wanted to marry a Jewish woman. And I liked him pretty quickly. And I told him I was Jewish. And I immediately clarified that by saying, well, I'm spiritual. And he was like, well, what do you mean? And I explained it to him, and he said, you're Jewish. Like, you're completely Jewish. What are you talking about? And I had this fear of identifying that way because that was the part of my life where I didn't have that relationship with God. And I was so afraid of re-entering it. And I went to go celebrate the Jewish holiday of Sukkot with his cousins about 10 days into dating him. And I completely fell in love with them. And it was sort of the beginning of I've been Jewish the whole time, but I began to fall in love with my Judaism again. And it was really only through having this trust that I was able to do that. And you talk about that in your book. And I think that's a big missing ingredient when we talk about dysfunction, we talk about toxic relationships, we talk about the things that plague families is, there's this missing component of spirituality, of faith, but how do we get there when we're so distrusting, rightfully so, right? I'm sure you get that question all the time.
Absolutely. Yeah. I always tell parents that your number one job is to provide safety, predictability, security for your child. That's your number one job. And of course, that takes many forms. There's material security, but a lot of parents just end there. And I don't want to say something that negatively casts any type of aspersions on men, but I want to say as a father that there is that certain occupational hazard of feeling like, look, I work so hard. And even if your wife's also working, but there's something about men that we identify with our work so much. And it's like, I work so hard, I pay the bills. And then it's like, what else do you want? Well, material security is the first level. Obviously, you think about like, for instance, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? So you got to have bread on the table in order to explore the meaning of life, right? But it doesn't end with just material security. There has to be emotional security, which means ultimately, like I always tell parents, if your child's going through something and they need to confide in somebody, and it's not you, then there are only two other options, two other possible scenarios that are the reality. Either when they've got something going on, they have no one to go to, in which case they're terribly alone, or they found somebody to go to and you don't get to pick who it is or what values that person has. So one of the big jobs of parents is not just to be the one who provides a roof over your child's head, but also to be the go-to person that they can seek out when they need grounding, when they need to be, I don't mean to get grounded like you're grounded. I mean grounding like to be emotionally regulated when they're panicked, when they're afraid, to talk through something, to be able to find that shoulder to lean on. And the one word again that I use to sum it all up is stability. And that's it's just everything. It sets you up for a lifetime when you have it. And when you don't have it, conversely, it's a lifetime of struggle overcoming it, which it can be done. It can be overcome, but it's a lot of work.
I think a lot of parents hear this and they see these videos on Instagram and maybe they've had a very traumatic childhood that they're recovering from at the same time that they're raising their own children. And there's so much fear. What if I'm already messing it up? What if I've already ruined my child's life? I think very, very, very good parents have those feelings every day. And you talk a lot about this. And you've even done a video about, is it too late to be a good parent?
Right.
What is your answer to that? What do you say to those parents? It's never too late.
Never too late. Never too late. I mean, obviously you shouldn't use that as an excuse to put it off, but I've seen it myself. I have a parenting course at this point. Over 2,000 mothers and fathers have gone through it. So I've had the privilege of watching families pretty front and center. And a lot of the parents who I've been involved with, their oldest kids were still in diapers, but a lot of them, their youngest kids were married and out of the house. And I've seen parents of adult children. I'll tell you a wild story that happened. I don't want to give too many details, but I was at a particular speaking engagement. And right before I went on, a woman came over to me. I'd say she's probably 30. And she said, I just want to let you know that I took your course, your parenting course. She says, but more important than that, I want you to know my mother took your parenting course. And she says, and I want you to know that we're all married and out of the house already, but my mother took your parenting course. And I said, did you see any change? Like, I asked this woman, did she see any change in her mother from taking the course? She says, I want to tell you something. Not did I see change. She said, my husband came to me and said, since your mother took the parenting course, our marital issues have resolved themselves. And
Wow.
as she told me this, another woman comes over and puts her arm around the first woman. And I suddenly realized, like, at first I thought maybe they're sisters. And then I realized this is her mother.
Wow.
And it was the mother that she was just speaking about. So I wasn't at liberty to divulge all that, but I figured it was fair, it was fair game to mention that she'd taken the course. And I said, "Oh, I heard you took my parenting course." And she smiled. She says, "Yes, I took it. It was great. Even though all my kids are out of the house already, I took the course. It was great." And then the daughter says to me, sort of like finishing the conversation that we had started before her mother showed up, she looks at me and she says, "It's amazing how one thing can affect so many things." And she didn't elaborate because her mother was standing right there at that point, but she was referring to the fact that her mother's healing improved her own marriage, meaning the married daughter is experiencing healing in her marriage with her husband because her mother is becoming a better parent. So that was what she meant. It's amazing how one thing, the mother-daughter relationship, can affect so many things, meaning one example being the marital relationship of the daughter. And it's true. It's like, and that going back to that Ross Perot clip that you referred to, where I had that clip where I was commenting on how in the 1988 presidential election, or 1992 presidential election, he was saying how the foundation of society is the family. If you want the biggest bang for your buck, the spot where if you strengthen that, it will have the most, call it ripple effect, it's in parent-child relationships. It's amazing how one thing can affect so many other things.
I love that you bring that up because I think that's one of the most powerful messages of recovery is that it just takes one person and that person can be you. And I think that removes this victim narrative, which is, I can understand the victim narrative very well. I showed up at 20 years old into those rooms and I'm looking at the 12 steps, and one of them is that I'm going to make amends to people. And I'm like, excuse me,
Right.
everyone owes me an apology.
Right.
I was hurt. I'm the victim. But you know what? Thinking about things that way kept me suffering because I had no choices. I was waiting for somebody to apologize to me. I was waiting for somebody else was essentially my higher power. It wasn't God. It was another person. I had given them that power. And until they apologized to me, I had no choices. Until my parent changed, I was going to be stuck forever. And when I changed, I experienced exactly what you're discussing. My relationship with my parents changed completely. I was the one who was going to those meetings. And I think people realize that they have choices, that they get to make different decisions in their own lives that can shape so many different people around them. And in the example that you gave with this mother whose children are already out of the house and already married, think about being an adult child yourself. If you're frustrated with one of your parents, what it would feel like for your parent to seek help, to go to your course. It would never be too late. It would be incredible for a parent to do that for themselves. So one of the most significant ways I think growing up in an alcoholic home affected me in my early 20s was through what many refer to as toxic relationships. I would get into a relationship with someone. I would have a really negative experience because of toxic dynamics that were at play. I would leave the relationship and I would find myself in the exact same relationship with a different person only months later. And I had this really significant experience where this just kept happening over and over and over again. And my very dear friend just looked at me and he basically held up a mirror and he said, "Laura, you tell me all the time what it is that you want for your life, and you pursue people who give you the exact opposite. And the only person," and this was the empowering part, "the only person who's going to be able to break that cycle is you." And my entire life changed that day. I decided that I was tired of my own behavior. I was going to change it because the only thing that felt harder than changing it was never getting to have what I wanted my whole life, never getting to have a beautiful marriage, never getting to love someone and be loved in return the way that we all deserve to be. And I often think about that time in my life and how hard it was to break out of that cycle. And I couldn't do it alone. I had so much support around me. I have what you write about in your book, A God of My Understanding. What is it that you want people to know about toxic relationships and addictive behaviors even, and how they can break those cycles in their own lives?
Yeah. You said something really powerful. I don't know if people who haven't lived it caught what you said because you said it quickly. And I don't know if people haven't lived it, they might not understand what you were saying. You mentioned that until you let go of you didn't use the word resentment, but that's what you're describing. The people who you felt hurt by had become your higher power, right?
Yes.
You said something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
Right.
absolutely. I was waiting for them to set me free. It was up to them.
Right.
My
so your
fate
life
was in
was
their
on
hands.
hold.
Yes.
Basically, your happiness was completely in their hands. Your sanity was in their
absolutely.
hands.
Yes.
Right. And you had to realize that you had given them that power, which doesn't justify their behaviors toward you. It can be that their behaviors toward you were absolutely wrong, and that they are morally accountable for the wrong they did. But that's a separate issue from the fact that you had given them that power of basically determining whether or not you get to be happy, whether or not you feel your life has value, whether you value yourself, and you had to take that power back from them.
Yes.
So, you talk about toxic relationships. I try to be delicate when I speak about spiritual topics because I know that it's a struggle for a lot of people. And there are many reasons why people struggle with spirituality. One reason, not the only reason, but one reason is because of kind of the stuff we're talking about here, where your, that trust muscle has been torn, blown out at an early age. And then, when you get burnt out from trust, then it becomes very hard to have that trust in a relationship with God. But I'm going to say something, I'm going to try to be delicate about it, but if you really, really want to analyze what is at the root of every toxic relationship, it is exactly what you were saying. It is expecting from another human being that which only God can give you. And I don't know of any way to stop that vicious cycle until you go to the real God and say, my worth, my validity as a being, my existence does not require a human being's approval. I am pre-validated because of the fact that I'm a child of God.
I love that. And I can see why you would be afraid to say it in that way, because, it's so difficult to break through the very valid resistance that I think many people have to religion, to faith, to spirituality because of the experiences that they've had. But I personally experienced what you're describing. I could not move past these resentments, which you talk about resentments as a re-editing of the past, like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. I could not get past these resentments that were plaguing my life until I stopped expecting other people to give me the things that God is there to give me. And to describe that to another person who is equally allergic to that word as I was is really hard to do. And I've sort of decided, through this podcast recently, that, I think my only option is really to talk about it because it is true for me. And that's all we can do. You talk in your book about, and this was one of my dad's favorite quotes, religion is for people who are afraid of hell. Spirituality is for people who've been there. Do you believe that to be true? Do you think we can have both? What is that? What do you think that saying is true?
Okay, so it's an old saying, and I've actually researched where it comes from. A lot of people told me online, David Bowie said that. Well, he did say that. He's not the one who made it up.
He didn't start it. Exactly.
He didn't start saying it. It's an old statement. I don't know where it comes from. They say it a lot in the rooms of recovery. I believe it's true. I think there's nuance there. Again, I was saying earlier that in the world of social media, everybody loves to take your soundbite and make it this all or nothing proposition. And I think you just alluded to the fact that you suspect there's probably more nuance, at least for me, when I say that, than it sounds
you
like.
appear very religious. Like I'm just, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know. I have those.
It
I'm
seems
wearing
like you
the
might be
garb.
religious from what I've gathered, right? And
Yeah, it
I
looks like I'm a rabbi. Yeah, it looks like I might be religious. So obviously, if you know anything about me, you could probably figure out. I don't think that religion and spirituality are mutually exclusive. I don't think they're mutually exclusive.
I agree.
And to the contrary, not only are they not mutually exclusive, I believe they really are interdependent. They need each other, and that one without the other. I'm not going to judge which is worse, but one without the other in either case is not fulfilling.
We'll be right back to I Just Have to Say with Laura Max after a quick word from our sponsor for today's episode, Styled by ALV here in Aspen, Colorado. Are you planning a celebration or event in Aspen? Whether it's a bridal or baby shower, a corporate event, or just a special gathering with friends, Styled by ALV is your go-to for creating an occasion to remember. Let me tell you, there is no swag I wouldn't ask Styled by ALV to make for me. Her designs are so creative. We're talking custom logos and taglines on merch for your event that will actually make you laugh. And best of all, they're items you'll actually want to use and wear long after the event is over. Your guests will take home the stuff that you give them after your big event, and they will wear it and use it. Can you imagine? Styled by ALV is all about custom merchandise, styled events, and tablescapes that add a personalized touch to any gathering. From perfectly branded party favors to stunning table settings that wow your guests, she knows how to elevate your event from memorable to unforgettable for style as high as the Rocky Mountains. If you're ready to make your next celebration in Aspen as stylish and unique as it deserves to be, visit styledbyalv.com or check her out on Instagram at styledbyalv. Trust me, your guests will be talking about it for years to come. And now back to our guest. Let's explore that for a minute, because I've come to believe what you're describing, but I don't really know how to explain it. Through the lens of spirituality, only through that lens was I able to rediscover my religion, through which my religious practices now benefit me tremendously. And if I didn't practice them, I think I would be far worse off. Why are they important? You even did a video about Yom Kippur. This is so funny. This might have actually been one of the first videos I saw of yours. My dearest friend, who happens to be my rabbi's wife, was talking to me about Yom Kippur. I have the hardest time fasting, Rabbi. Like, I'm a child. I cannot deal. And so she was saying, Laura, as long as you fast, it doesn't matter if you get here or not. It doesn't matter if you get to services or not. Just like do the mitzvah, do it the best you can. I seriously laid in my bed all day like a sick person, but I made it and I did it. And right after, and when it was over, I'm like hobbling to services to break the fast. I see this video from you and you're saying,
oh, wow.
It doesn't. Yeah, it was literally the second the fast was over. And I'm like, Leva, look at this. Look at what I did.
Yeah, that's right.
I did the right thing. You were right. And you said, it doesn't matter if you can't get to services because the most important mitzvah is fasting.
Right.
And
people were up in arms about that, by the way.
Really?
They were furious.
Oh, interesting.
You have to go to the big box. You have to go to the official religious place. Yeah.
I have to tell you, it was a very spiritual experience for me to let that go and to do this one thing, which every year I will make excuses for. Like, I showed up at services. I mean, one year I actually even gave a speech at the service and I'm like, well, I did my mitzvah. But this felt holier. It felt very important. I don't know how to articulate to anyone because I can't tell you I know exactly why I'm doing that other than that it feels right in my soul and it feels like the right thing to do. Why are these things important? Why are these religious practices important?
So, let's define here the religious and the spiritual. Because I think a lot of people would be like, that's so weird. You were lying in bed, feeling awful for 26 hours, and you think that's meaningful? Like, just eat something.
Yes. So many people have said that to me. And I'm like, wait, no, it was meaningful. It was really meaningful.
Right. Okay. And the answer is, well, Jewish law says that you're not allowed to eat. And that, unless it's like life and death, obviously if it's a severe medical emergency, then, in a life-saving measure, a person's not only they don't have to fast, they shouldn't fast.
They shouldn't.
But if it's just you're going to lie in bed with a headache, you're going to you're going to feel awful for 26 hours. Okay, so be it. But people question really like that. But I could get up, have breakfast, take a shower, drive to synagogue, and then maybe hear a nice sermon, hear the cantor sing some nice songs. I'll read some prayers, and I'll have a meaningful experience. What's wrong with that? And by the way, I'm not judging. I'm not trying to make anyone feel bad if that's the experience that they chose. But I'm not trying to speak for you, but I'm since we're discussing it, you asked me to help explore why you may have found it meaningful to have the holiest day of year spent in bed feeling awful. So great question.
Yeah, why?
Question.
It was meaningful.
Pretty weird.
I was so glad I did it. I can't tell anyone why. I don't have the words.
Yeah, you're pretty sure it was meaningful, but you don't even know why. Okay.
Exactly.
Okay. So let's talk about the difference between spirituality and religion as I understand it. Spirituality is about personal experience. Religion is about structure. It's about rules. It's about tradition. It's bigger than me. It's way bigger than me. And those, in a certain way, are antithetical, because if spirituality is my personal experience, then it's all about me. And if religion is bigger than me, then those are two opposites. You refer to the book God of Our Understanding, the book that I wrote on recovery. I think I haven't read the book in many years. The book came out, I think, in 2010. So I don't remember if I'm quoting myself correctly here, but I believe that I mention a verse from the book of Exodus, which is actually during the splitting of the sea after the children of Israel leave Egypt. And they say, "This is my God, and I will glorify him, the God of my fathers, and I will exalt him." And I mention these two concepts, my God and the God of my fathers. So my God means my personal God. The God of my fathers means something that predates me, something that I was born into, something that's bigger than just my lifetime. You could call those two things spirituality and religion. I point out that it's interesting that in that verse, it says both of them, but it says the personal God first. This is my God. And then it says the God of my fathers. And I think that one of the things that's pointing to is an experience that I've seen many, many people have, and you yourself shared that this was your experience, that you found God, you tried to find God as a child. It was kind of ruined for you. You succeeded in finding God in a program of recovery where it was completely not any theological, like that's, people should know, by the way, the 12-step programs are very scrupulous, very meticulous about not enforcing or even espousing any type of sectarian theology, meaning it's God, however your conception of God is. It's completely up to you, right? They stay out of that. The program literature does recommend that you should go study your religion, but it stays out of that matter. God is however you want to understand God. Okay, so you found God in a program of recovery, and only afterward were you able to have that date with your future husband at the sukkah at his cousin's house and be like, oh, this Judaism stuff, yeah, this could work. So, I'm not saying that the other, if you would flip it, the other way around couldn't have worked, but the reality is it didn't work. That's not how it happened.
And for most, that's not how it happens either. I think if there's like a chasm there, I think I've watched so many people who were raised in Jewish homes and they love being Jewish and they have such a wonderful faith in God, and that was never interrupted. But I think if it was interrupted, as it was in my case, I needed to find God in my own way before I could hear about these traditions that I had grown up with, because they were all associated with my past, with these painful things. This God that didn't accept me, like I didn't feel good enough for
you
that
came
God.
into the rooms, you said at 20, right?
Yes.
So imagine a day before you came into the rooms, somebody told you, Yom Kippur, I want you to lie in bed and be miserable.
It was
for
a hard no. It was a hard no.
But
Yeah.
get out of here.
I didn't even remember. I mean, Rabbi, if I'm being honest, like Yom Kippur would come and go and I wouldn't notice. I didn't even know what day it was.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how much more so if somebody would say, and now you're going to lie in bed with a headache for a whole day. Okay. And yet, after coming to the program and finding a higher power of your own understanding through your own personal experiences, through your own process, after doing that for a few 24 hours, it starts to make sense that, you know what, if this God who knows better than I know how I should live my life tells me it's preferable for me to fast on this day, even if I won't be able to concentrate on my prayers,
I trust him.
Surrender to that.
Yeah, I trust him. I feel like there's meaning. I feel like I might not understand why, but I think it's important. I think it matters because I trust this person who's telling me what to do. Much like my children, they question me sometimes, of course, but most of the time they really trust what I have to say. They ask me questions about it. There's pushback. They're children. But it's not like, I don't like you. I don't know what you're trying to tell me. I don't respect you. They respect what I have to say. They believe where I'm coming from. They might not always like it, but they're like, all right, this sounds like it might be the right thing to do because you're saying it.
You know, there's a term that I learned from Instagram, and I wish I remember who used this term, but there was a woman who commented on one of my videos, and she used the term epistemic trust. And I didn't know what it was. I had to Google it. And then after I Googled it, then I realized it's related to the word epistemology, which is a branch of philosophy which studies the nature of truth. How do you know something to be true? So epistemic trust, epistemic comes from that same etymology. Epistemic trust means a particular type of trust that someone is a reliable source of truth. Because there are different type of trust. Like I trust that if you tell me you're going to meet me at the library at 5 p.m., you're going to show. Or I trust that if I leave my phone on the table while I go to the bathroom, you're not going to steal it. But epistemic trust means I trust you that you know the truth, because maybe you want to tell me the truth, but you don't even know it yourself. Okay, so you know the truth. And then also that in goodwill, you're going to share accurately the truth with me. So I read this comment. I forget which video it was, but this woman commented on one of my videos saying, well, this is an example of epistemic trust. And then when I figured out what the word meant, I suddenly realized something that for years I had grappled with, a concept from one of the classic rabbinic texts, 1,000-year-old text called the Kuzari. And in it, he explains why the first of the 10 commandments is, I am the Lord your God who took you out of Egypt. So he says that before God gives us the commandments and tells us how to live, he first establishes that there's a pre-existing relationship of helpfulness, which is also why he doesn't say, I'm the Lord your God who created the heavens and the earth, which is seemingly a much greater feat than taking you out of Egypt. But creating the heavens and the earth is impersonal. Taking you out of Egypt is personal. So I'm the Lord your God who took you out of Egypt. We've got a thing here. Now God can tell me how to live. So epistemic trust means that I trust that you know the right thing and you're going to tell me the right thing. But how do I get that feeling from you? It's based on a previous history of your having been there for me. Think about this. Even God himself was not immune from that ironclad law. Meaning even God himself. God could have said, just listen to me, I'm God. But he didn't say that. He first established a context of a pre-existing relationship of helpfulness. Then he started telling us his smart ideas for how we should live.
I love that you brought that up because I look at parenting that way. You talk about this a lot. You talk about apologizing to your children and about how you're not surrendering your power by doing that.
Yeah,
You're
but by
not
the way, not as a
screaming.
ritual. It's not like I'm telling parents, "Oh, this you haven't lived until you've apologized to your child." Not
Right.
saying
Not
like
as a ritual. Yeah.
well, I'm saying if you owe them an apology, then
If you owe them an
as
apology, which we are adults, we're human beings, right? So we make mistakes. But I know that, I mean, an adult apologizing to me as a child, I mean, I grew up in the 90s. I was born in the late 80s. That wasn't exactly something that you saw very often. And if you did, it was, I'm sorry, but you were driving me insane. I'm sorry you feel that way. I'm sorry, but you're driving me crazy. I'm sorry. You have to forgive me. The onus is on you to do that, by the way. So short-lived moment for you to feel apologized to. But being able to have this trust with them where you give them love and you give them care. We look at things, I think a lot of people look at the parent-child relationship as, you know, there needs to be authority, there needs to be control. Absolutely. Is it important that as a parent, you are the trusted authority? Absolutely. But how do you get there? I think a lot of that is from the things you're describing. It's from being trustworthy.
well, what you say, you know, the trusted authority. That's the golden phrase there.
The trusted authority. Yeah.
Trusted
Yeah.
authority, because we don't want our children running like wild animals with no guidance and with no standards, with no sense of right and wrong.
No, we don't. Yeah. And thank you
No,
for saying that, by the way, because
it
that
would be
is not
awful.
what like gentle parenting, quote unquote, like we have now taken this line, this gentle parenting thing, and we've decided that that's what it means, that it's like, I'm going to have feral children. Yeah.
Feral, right? So
Yeah.
no, we're not trying to have feral children.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, what we need to do though is establish ourselves as the trusted authority. In other words, I need my child to listen to me. You're 100% right. I need my child to listen to me. But how am I going to really get my child to listen to me? And you're going to say, well, you'll scare them into listening to you. Is that really listening to you? Or is that like, I don't want to get a ticket, so if I see a cop, I'll slow down. But as soon as there's no cops, I'm going to speed again. In other words, are you just trying to get behavioral compliance while you're watching them? Or are you actually trying to install a moral compass in this child that they will have internalized even when no one's watching? And if that's what you want, then the only way to do it is by winning their trust and becoming the trusted authority.
That's what I think of when I hear people talk about this sort of old school authoritative parenting style where there was, I mean, corporal punishment involved. And a lot of people who defend that will say, well, it works. And my child was well behaved. And I can look at what my kid did when they were a kid. And they always sat down and listened and they didn't talk too loudly in restaurants. And I'm thinking, well, what was the price for that? Like the price was that they behaved in a certain way at a certain time. But like, if you think that those things are going to yield better, quote unquote, behavior in the time period in which that person was in your home, you might be right. I don't know, but it's definitely not a long-term solution for behavior. And that's all it is it's just about the behavior.
Look, the world has changed so much in our lifetime. The world has changed so much. Once upon a time, especially if you're talking about Jewish people, like in the shtetl, if you didn't like how you were being raised, tough luck.
Tough luck. Right.
Tough luck. Where are you going to go? Where are you going to go? There's nowhere to go. Especially if you're Jewish. There's literally nowhere to go. Who's going to take you? No one.
No one.
And even to a certain extent, you know, like 50, 60 years ago, the world was somewhat closed. People lived where they lived. They had the community that they grew up in. And there was a certain amount of containment. So even if you were dissatisfied with your upbringing and your family of origin, your community of origin, the options to defect were fairly limited. In today's day and age, you don't even have to geographically relocate to become a defector. All you need is an internet connection. And what happens, we see this, is that children who don't feel that epistemic trust, they don't believe their parents have their best interests at heart, will quickly create a new family and a new community and a new tribe. And I'm not saying that in a condemning way. I'm actually saying it as like, makes perfect sense. It's a survival mechanism. Why wouldn't the human being want to have a support system? And if they're not given one, where they're growing up, they're going to try to create one. The problem with it is that this has caused, I'll say the problem, then I'll also say the blessing of it. The problem is that this has caused a lot of lack of stability. As much as we may resist the containment, the confinement of the old ways, there is wisdom. There is wisdom in our traditions, and especially our faith tradition, and especially when we believe in revelation, that this is something that comes from God ultimately. So that's the negative part of it. Now, the positive side of it, the blessing of it, is it has forced parents to up their game. Because a generation ago, and so much more so 2-3 generations ago, you could be a mediocre parent or even a below mediocre parent and never personally face consequences because your child has no options. Today, parents have to be excellent. They have to be excellent in order to keep their kids. And I don't say that to pressure parents. I'm not trying to create anxiety in parents. I believe that actually the path to being an excellent parent is quite attainable, because I believe, as a person of faith, that God has actually already endowed every parent with that capacity, with that potential. But yeah, in today's day and age, we have to be worthy of our children's trust. We can't just rely on the fact that they don't have any other options.
I love that you put it that way. And I often also observe, and I've experienced this myself, especially when it comes to religion. In the 90s, I think a lot of religion was used to shame and to punish, and people wanted to get as far away from it as possible, rightfully so. But now here we are. You can't really bring up any of these things without people automatically turning off your video. Never mind. I don't want to hear about God. That's not for me. But wait. I have faith, speaking of faith, that the pendulum is swung very far in the opposite direction. And the next thing that it gets to do is start to swing back until we get closer to the truth, right? So before, we were very off center as well. We were using religion as a punishing tool. But now we're over here and we won't even talk about it. We're terrified of structure. We're terrified of giving our children rules. We're terrified of even referencing God, because that could lead to our ultimate cancellation, which is, but here you are, right? You have 275,000 followers on Instagram. People are clearly very hungry for what you have to say. And I talk to more people than not that want this in their life. How many times do I hear somebody in conversation with me, if they don't know me very well, and they're like, I don't want to bring up like the God stuff, and like, I'm not really like that, but I sort of believe. And then they'll tell me like a very spiritual belief that they have. And I'm like, oh, you don't have to worry about telling me that. I completely understand and I totally relate. But people are very afraid to talk about it because it's thought of as that thing that we all kind of had to survive or endure.
Because it's so easily weaponized, and therefore so many people have had poor experiences with it.
And I don't want to make anybody feel badly with it. I don't want to bring it up and then make somebody feel terribly. That's not my intention either.
Exactly.
But I do think
that's why I hesitate whenever I balk at going way too intense with the spirituality. It's not because I don't want to get canceled, or I don't want somebody to not like me, or I don't want to make somebody uncomfortable unnecessarily, because if I say something in a way that I'm comfortable with, but they're uncomfortable with, then they tune me out. Then I don't get a chance to say the next thing that I think may be helpful to them. So if I'm trying to be helpful, then there's this certain delicate balance. Yes, in order to be helpful, there are certain things I have to reveal, even if it's sort of out of the box for the listener. But at the same time, if I'm just going to go full throttle and not worry about their pre-existing prejudices and say things that I know they can't accept, at least for the time being, then I'm undercutting my own ability to be helpful.
I think some people view that as like being brave and I'm being confident or whatever about my views. But really, I think we need to know, actually, it's okay. And you talk about this in your book, the Baal Shem Tov, telling this story about, when the atheist comes to your door and needs help, level with the atheist. Like the atheist does not believe that there is a God. So you are going to respond as though that is the truth. And that is how you are going to be the most helpful. They don't think that there is a God there to help them. So telling the atheist, oh, I have faith, God's going to take care of your problems.
It's actually even more than that. The original story of the Baal Shem Tov, it's even if the person who comes to the door, a poor man comes to the door asking for a handout, even if the poor man is a believer, even if he's a believer, don't tell him, oh, God will help him. You help him. As if God will not help him. They asked the Baal Shem Tov, he used to say, everything in the world was created by God. Everything that exists has a purpose, has a holy use. So they said, well, what about atheism? He said, well, that has a very obvious use. When the poor man comes to your door and he asks for a handout, don't get all religious on him and say, God will help you. Act as if there's no God and you help him.
You help him. And that is God helping him, right?
I mean,
we're here for each other.
Even if the poor man is a believer, that's not the time to talk about faith. Maybe after you fed him and you gave him a few dollars, then you could also speak to him about God. But first things first.
Well, speaking of God, you talk about something in your reels that I absolutely love. And you say that everything is God speaking to us. Everything we see and hear is direct communication.
By the way, that's also from the Baal Shem Tov. I don't think that I said specifically that it's from the Baal Shem Tov, but that's one of the primary teachings of the Baal Shem Tov, that every single detail of life is orchestrated from on high as a communication to us.
I'm so glad you shared this because it definitely made me feel a little less alone, as I totally live my life this way in a way that I think honestly would seem extremely bizarre to a lot of people. The other day, I wanted to get started on a project that I knew was going to take a lot of my time. And I'm talking to my husband about it and he's telling me, I should consider reconsidering. And I have this sort of hesitant feeling about starting this project in my gut. And we walk into this gas station convenience store and the song Don't Rush Me is playing. And I listen. I knew this is God speaking to me. I do this like 100 times a day. Like,
do you think your husband called the radio station and made a request?
He might have. He might have, but he lives his life this way too. It's both of us. And sometimes I think about it and it works. It's been great. But I don't believe I opened an app a few months later on my phone. I was thinking about this project again. It was just popped up in my mind. Hadn't thought about it in a while. I open up an app on my phone and it says, now's a great time to get started. And I just don't think, it happens to me it happens to me every day. Like I ask a question, I get a response if I'm listening. But telling somebody that I'm getting my answers from God through my app on my phone or the song in the gas station, it sometimes doesn't communicate as well as I wanted to.
Well, you asked me for this podcast yesterday, right?
I did. Yes.
Okay. That's okay. We reveal how the sausage is made, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
So
yes.
One reason why I said, let's just do it tomorrow is because of the way my brain functions. Like there's now and there's not now. Like it's very hard for me to, like people say, well, next April, I can't do that. But another reason why I was like, okay, let's do it tomorrow is because when opportunities present themselves, there's a reason why they arise at a certain time. So we can't always do everything. We can't be in all places at all times. We can't say yes to every opportunity. That's true. But to the extent that we can sort of ride the wave and take the hint, and when a door opens, just walk through it, I think that's the way to live that's in alignment with this idea that everything is divine communication. So it's like, you're calling me, you're reaching out, you're saying, hey, I want to talk about these topics. Like, okay, that's divine communication. Now, obviously, you have free choice and you have your whole story, what led you to that moment and your reason why you're calling me. But there's a bigger story than what you're thinking and what I'm thinking. And if we're God conscious, we try to be as flexible as possible with riding those waves.
Yeah, I totally agree. I love that. And I love that you said yes. Thank you so much for saying yes and for being here and talking to me. My interview prior to this one was with Marianne Williamson. I saw a post that she had shared on her Instagram, and I was so compelled to respond to it that I actually sent her a DM about it. And along with that DM was a request to come on my show, which I completely forgot sending this message. And a few hours later, I get a response that she's willing to come on. And it was like I had sent that message exactly when I was supposed to. And after interviewing her, I saw a video from you, and I'm like, I know that that's my next guest. And I'm so
Right.
glad.
God's lining it up for you.
I'm like, that's it. I had that feeling in my chest. I'm like, I know I have to talk to you. I am so thankful for the way that you have honestly dedicated your life to sharing. You're sharing Jewish wisdom, to sharing what you know. It has helped so many people, and I'm one of them. And thank you for coming on here and sharing it with so many more people. It's been an honor to talk to you today.
It's an honor. It's a privilege. And just do me one favor. If you become privy to the rest of the story, meaning if your higher power happens to let you know how somebody was affected by this podcast, we don't always know. Usually we don't know. But if you do find out how anyone was affected by this, let me know. So it's always great to hear.
It's so great to hear. I will totally tell you. And I know what you mean. I don't think we tell each other those things often enough, right? We call our friend with the problem, but once we've solved it, we don't share how we solved it. So it's the same thing with stuff like this. I will absolutely tell you, Rabbi. And thank you again for coming on. If you want more of where that came from, you can follow Rabbi Shais Taub, and as so many others have, on Instagram at Rabbi_Shais_Taub. I will put that link in the show notes, or you can subscribe to his YouTube channel where he's approaching 50,000 subscribers. So help him reach it, because we need to spread the word. His website, SoulWords.org, includes more of his talks and videos. Thank you for being such a light in this world, Rabbi, and I look forward to joining you all again soon.